What happens when you're standing in the pulpit, but silently falling apart at home? What happens when you're serving God publicly, but privately questioning whether He's forgotten you? Today's conversation is for anyone who has ever carried secret shame, wrestled with codependency, or felt like faith worked for everyone else but them. Welcome to Unmasked, where we take off the filters and get real about faith, failure, and finding freedom. I'm your host, Wesley Farnsworth, a dad, veteran, author, and a man who's learned that God does His best work in the middle of our mess. Each episode, we have honest conversations with people who have walked through addiction, pain, or doubt, and with pastors, leaders, and everyday believers who are learning to live and lead authentically. So take a breath, pull up a chair, and let's get real. This is Unmasked. Today on Unmasked, I'm joined by Steve Rotermond, a father of 7, speaker, ministry leader, and founder of Walk Right Ministries. Steve's journey into faith began at 21 and quickly led him into ministry, but while he was serving in churches and leading others, he was privately carrying the crushing weight of his wife's addiction to pain medication. Shame, confusion, codependency, and a growing sense of spiritual abandonment eventually led him to step away from ministry and from God. It wasn't until a Christian counselor helped him uncover the depths of his codependency and a distorted view of identity that truly began the healing. Now, 12 years later, Steve is back, not with polished answers, but with a story of surrender, identity in Christ, and the kind of healing that only comes from hidden wounds when they're finally brought into the light. Steve, thanks so much for being with us today on Unmasked and trusting us with your story.
Yeah, Wesley, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for your service in the military and just what you're doing here on your podcast.
Absolutely, man. It's when you first messaged me, we had some good conversation back and forth about your story, and I'm really excited for you to share it with the Unmasked communities. Without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and turn the mic or floor over to you, and I can't wait to hear your story in a lot more depth than our back and forth.
Yeah, no, great. I'd be honored to, and this story is not better than anybody else's. It's not worse than anybody else's. It's just my story, and it's just how I lived life. But it started at a young age. Trauma came in because of the fall of Adam, right? We're all less than, we feel less than, we're not good enough. But then at the age of 4, when you have a mother that abandons you and takes off and that you don't see until you're 18 years old, sets some trauma in you. I had an alcoholic father who loved me the way he could. He was an alcoholic off and on, but a father that would tell you that you're not good enough, you're not going to amount to anything. You know, when the going gets tough, Steve gets going, and just all these things and the crushing words a child should never hear. And it was like, why can't you be like your brother? And that just set the tone for even more doubt. At the age of 6, I was sexually molested in a construction trailer by a neighbor. That went on for a season. And he said, if you tell anybody, we're going to be in trouble. Well, knowing how I got in trouble with my dad, I didn't like it. So I held that secret for 40 something years until I was in counseling. And moving on from that, I ended up growing up with that less than feeling, found the love of my life at that time, got married. 3 years into our marriage, found out that she was addicted to pain medication from her trauma and battled that for the next 13 years. And while that was going on, at the age of 21, I came to know the Lord, and like most people, went into a church. I went forward. I got the ticket to go to heaven, put it in my back pocket, and, really wanted to live for the Lord and really wanted to work this out. I got involved in Promise Keepers back in the mid to late 90s. Promise Keepers was really big, if people remember that. It was a men's ministry, make men better leaders, fathers, husbands, just all out better men. And I'd come home and I'm like, man, I feel I'm going to talk to men like this someday. I'm just going to be powerful like this and just work for the Lord. And I was just so excited and felt called, and stumbled through life a little bit more and battling the addiction. And then we ended up coming to a head. My wife and I came to a head with this addiction, and she finally went into an outpatient treatment center. She got out, and we had a chance to move to another state. We lived in St. Louis, Missouri, had a chance to move to Columbus, Ohio. So we moved there. There's nothing like running from your problems, right? But in the back of my head, I'm thinking, hey, she won't be around these doctors, because you could doctor shop back then. You can go to 5, 6 doctors, and they weren't all connected like they are now, and just get all these prescriptions. And I thought, man, this is a great way. We'll just run. And, not thinking that consciously, but it was in the back of my mind that we'll just run from our problems. So we moved to Columbus, Ohio, and our 2 boys at the time would play with some neighbor kids, and their parents came down one day and said, hey, it's nice to meet you. Would you like to go to our church? And we're like, you know what? We haven't been to church in a while, because we were going through this addiction, and just walked away. And we're like, yeah, we'd like to get back in there. So we end up going to this church. Again, it's like nobody was in the room. The pastor was speaking just directly to me. So I end up getting involved. And this is a great story. This is a pastor who can go to a new beginners meeting, meet all new people that are new members of the church, 30 people, and pick out each one of their names and call them by name by the end of the meeting. But I was in sound and would give him his mic every Sunday. The second Sunday, he's like, I'm sorry, what's your name again? I said, it's Steve, gave him his mic. Well, the weekend after that came up again. He's like, oh my gosh. He's like, I never do this, but what's your name? And I said, Steve. So give him the mic. And on the third weekend, he comes up and he's like, I am so sorry. I just cannot remember your name. I can remember everybody's name. I'm like, I know, I've watched you in this, these classes. And he says, I need to take you to lunch. I owe you a lunch. I'm so sorry. And I'm like, okay. So I end up going to lunch with him. And I told him that I felt called into the ministry, and I kind of been avoiding it. And he took me under his wing, and I just skyrocketed from there. I did a stint from Liberty, did a Grace Seminary, and ended up being a children's pastor. This was a large church. I had 150 kids. So I ended up being a pastor there, got involved in men's ministry, became a director of Celebrate Recovery. And I went through the training to become a commander of Awana. And I was just doing all kinds of stuff. And eventually got called out to planted a church, and had a radio ministry. Life's going great, right? Well, behind the scenes, what you didn't know, that my wife was back on pain medication. And it just so happens right after we went to that church for the first time, about 3 months after that, I had appendicitis and ended up having emergency surgery, got out, was healing, go to the doctor's office for a checkup. And he's like, hey, do you need any more pain medication? And I'm like, no, I never took the ones you give me because I don't like that stuff. He's like, oh, your wife called and said you accidentally threw the bottle away with some trash. Then she had to pick you up a new script. Talk about shame hitting me. Talk about embarrassment. And I was like, wow. And I said, oh, yeah, sure. And I quickly got out of that doctor's office. He came home, and the fight was on. It was a, fight. And this time it was, I'm sorry. Let's pray through it. Let's get through it. Okay. And it just wouldn't go away. She just continued, and I was battling her. She was battling me. We were fighting through this, all while I'm being a pastor, and wondering why God wasn't going to fix her. Why don't you want to fix her? Why don't you want to set this straight? I'm working for you now. I'm directly working for you. I know the boss. You can do this. I've got shortcuts. Let's fix this. And she just wouldn't get fixed. And it was just becoming so shameful. And I was loving on all these other people and selling Jesus and helping them and doing all this great things. And I was just becoming more angry with God. And why aren't you fixing this? Why aren't you changing things? It ended up getting into my mind that this is just all fake. This is just nothing. And I got to a point where it was so embarrassing watching my wife pass out on the front row of the church while I'm preaching on a Sunday. She's not off. That I just walked away. I just quit. I gave the church and the building over to a River of Life church. They came in. I only had like 36 people in the church, but I just told everybody that I just had to take a break and handed it over, and I walked away. We moved out of the community. I was so shameful. Moved to a smaller town, and the battle was on. I walked away from the church. I walked away from the ministry. I walked away from God. And I said, fine, you don't want to help me? I'll fix this on my own. And that was for 2 years, and it was hell. I truly believe that was hell. And it was just me fighting an addict. You're not going to take medicine. Yes, I am. No, you're not. I cut off all the credit cards. She'd find money. I'd take her off the insurances. She'd get state funding. I mean, it was just one whirlwind of a fight after another. And a good Christian friend of mine that stayed with me through all of this said, you really need to go see this counselor. I don't need a counselor. My wife does, but I don't need a counselor. He's like, no, I think it'd be good for you to go. And so he took me, and I went to this counselor, and I was in that office for 15 minutes. And he goes, you're part of the problem. What? He's like, yeah, you're a codependent. He's like, you just don't use drugs. You use emotions. You're destroying your family just as much as she is. I was livid. I would never wanted to deck somebody as much as I wanted to deck him. And I was just floored at that point. I was so mad. And I left the office and just ended up going home, getting on the computer, typed in what is codependency. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, wow, this relationship, that relationship, this relationship, everything codependency. And I ended up going back. I did go back, and I went back for several years and figured out what this codependency was, and figured out who I really am on the inside, who I didn't think I was on the outside at this church. And he said something very profound to me. He said, you need to find your identity in Jesus Christ. I said, what are you talking about? I'm a pastor. I know this stuff. I sell it. I can preach. And he's like, no, you need to find your identity. He's like, you need to step out of being an adoptive son and step into the true sonship of what you have inheritance in the kingdom. And I was like, what are you talking about? So we went down that road in counseling, and then it hit me. In that day, you know that I'm in you, or I'm in the Father. Father's in me. We're in you. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And we're living out this life together, this whole thing together. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then you start reading about this union, and you start reading about all this stuff that they never taught in seminary in a Baptist background. They never taught union. They never taught, that God knew you before the foundations of the earth. You had this wonderful relationship, and this just going down this road of this spirituality started to wake me up. And I ended up getting the strength to save myself, separated from my wife, ended up trying to save my kids, and just moving on with life from there. I was a Christian because I went forward and got the ticket, but I was never transformed. I did Christianity for me, and what could God do for me instead of stepping in the kingdom, and what can I do for you? And this whole time I wanted him to change her and never asked him to change me. And all he wanted to do was change me. And that's pretty much comes up to the point where we are. Unfortunately, I ended up getting a divorce, and she passed away about 3 years ago with an overdose. I was since remarried, and we end up having 7 kids now. So 3 were mine, 3 were hers. We had 1 together. Got to make the perfect 7, right? I couldn't have all my friends make fun of the Brady Bunch, so I had to have another child to cut that off. But here we are today with this new ministry, and we can talk about how we got there and everything that happened in between. But pretty much that's the story in a nutshell.
Man, Steve, that is a deep, deep story with a lot of different twists and turns, if you will.
Yes.
And there's a couple things that you brought up that I just want to go back and not necessarily ask a question on, but just touch base on, because it's stuff that I can relate to personally that I haven't heard mentioned on here before. One of them is the ministry Promise Keepers.
Yeah.
Man, I remember growing up in church and hearing of this ministry and seeing all these men go out on these retreats and coming back and just like on fire. And I remember thinking as a teen, I can't wait to be a part of that ministry. And then I reach adulthood and it's like, it's gone.
Yeah.
And there's just not anything out there anymore for them at the same level, except for little one-offs that local ministries are doing, local churches are doing. At least that's what it seems. So I love that you brought that up, because it's something that I could definitely relate to, and I remember very fondly thinking of as a ministry.
Yeah, back in the mid-90s. I followed them all around the Midwest. I'd go volunteer and just, I would Indianapolis and Memphis and Nashville, and
yeah,
I would just travel on the weekends and go do volunteer work there. And it was just amazing. Great.
That's all.
Great
awesome.
For its time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that I love is that, typically when we have, when I have pastors on, right? I've had a couple pastors on now before you, and they've always been, we've talked from the angle of, helping other people, and, sharing their testimony about how they got in the ministry and things like that. And I love that you're doing that, but you're also doing it from an angle of, hey, I'm not perfect. Because there's a lot of pastors, I feel like, and a lot of people out there that I believe put pastors on a pedestal, right?
Right.
Their pastors are not human. They're subhuman. They're God's their boss. They can't do wrong. Whatever. And pastors are human, just like everybody else, and they have their own struggles. You just probably don't see them. And so I love that you're kind of untaking that mask off, and you're saying, hey, yeah, I was a pastor, but I'm human. And I absolutely love that. And so when you think about that, when you think about serving in ministry while privately carrying the weight of everything going on at home, what was it like to preach or lead while internally feeling the shame and defeat?
I felt like a hypocrite. So I was carrying that weight. I felt like a liar. I was carrying that weight. But on the flip side of that, why was I a pastor and why did I stay so long? Well, I didn't know I had codependency at that time. I never really knew the word. Checking back on, when we found out about codependency and going backwards, I was doing it because I felt loved. I felt needed. I was important. I woke up and people needed me that day. I needed to pray for people and I needed to go help them or go be with their family at a hospital. And I was getting everything that I felt I needed. So while I fed into that emotional drug on that side, the flip side was I was just completely miserable and shameful. And this just was all fake. You can't even describe the shame that you have because you feel less than already.
Mm.
And now I'm in an important role, an important position of leading people to know the Lord. And I still feel like a piece of crap. So what good was it to go forward and get a ticket?
Right.
And just didn't believe any of it. I just couldn't believe anything that was happening to everybody else. Wasn't happening to me. So
yeah, I can relate. When I was deep in my addiction, I was still serving in the church. I was running various ministries and volunteering in ministries, and on the outside, I looked like I had it all together.
Yeah.
And I was talking the talk, I was walking the walk at church, but at home I was struggling. On the inside, I was struggling the entire time. And so I can relate to that essentially imposter syndrome feeling. While you're at church, you're like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
How am I qualified to do this?
And that's an important point for your listeners. It's the devil doesn't care that we go to church. The devil doesn't care that you're a pastor. The devil doesn't care that you serve in children's ministry every day or work in sound or play drums or sing songs. He doesn't care about any of that. He just wants to make sure that outside of that church, you're not a light and you're not love and you're not transformed.
Yeah.
And there are so many people stuck in that because they just can't get over the fact that they are truly loved.
Yeah.
And that the redeeming blood of Christ really does make them righteous and clean.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, especially if you're serving in the church right now, you're living in this season of, excuse me, or the season with shame. And you feel like because you're in this role, you can't go and get help because what are they going to think of you?
Mm-hmm.
I can say that because I've done it with experience, and I'm sure Steve can agree or would agree with this. And if you're listening today and we're speaking to you, it's not by accident. And I want you to know that that is exactly what the enemy, the devil, wants you to believe. He wants you to live in that shame. He wants you to live in that fear, because as long as you're living in those two things, he has a foothold in your life. And
Right.
you are not going to find freedom. Man, I love it when stuff like this comes out and it was not planned.
Yeah.
But there's just so much truth to it. And it's stuff that I don't believe people say often enough.
Right.
And so I just love it.
I was at a church the first church before I planted, I had about 1,500 members. I was the director of Celebrate Recovery. And you have 30 people in Celebrate Recovery.
Mm.
And half of them don't even go to your church. They're just going for the step work. And it's like, how bad are we not letting people get transformed and letting them know this? And it's just a point where you leave a church on a Sunday and everybody goes out to lunch and you just got done singing holy is God and how great thou art and you're just so awesome, thank you. And then you watch somebody in your service yell at a waitress because he had to wait 5 extra minutes for his pancakes. Or they're cutting people off in traffic and flipping the bird when you're coming out of the parking lot of a church that big. And it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And I was that person. I wasn't transformed. We buy the ticket, we think we're safe, but we don't understand that heaven's here now. The kingdom's here. We're supposed to partake in this now and be transformed. And we don't. We just come into Christianity for what can you do for me? How can you get me through this life? And we're in such a hurry to get out of here. It's like, that's not it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Another thing that you said in your testimony as you were talking there towards the beginning of the episode was, you said you felt like that God was helping everybody else but you. What did you feel like, or what did you do, I guess you could say, when you had that feeling? And what did that do to your faith in those seasons?
We already come into this with a separated view. We're separated from God. We come into that view. We don't understand what he reconciled on the cross was that relationship and that image that he created us in. So we come into that separate view. On top of it, we view God as our mother or father that we had growing up. So I viewed God as a guy, he kind of loves me, he tolerates me, but Jesus sneaks me in the back door late at night because I smell like poo. And that's the view we have. We have that view. So when you're in ministry and you're watching people get transformed, the true people that get transformed, you feel even more shame and you feel even more less than. It's like, okay, I guess he just wants to help other people, but not me. And it just slowly eats at you. And the shame builds up until it's like you just don't want it anymore. I don't care. I don't want you. I can do this on my own. And that's the boiling point. It's just you just walk away, and that's where people, I think, walk away. Because I used to think people like me now were weird back then. I was like, these people are just weird. God's not that good. He's good, but there's just no way they have this much freedom. They're just weird. And now I'm one of those weird people that are just like, God is so good, and he was in every moment of my life just screaming for me, hey, I'm right here. But I wouldn't look at him. I was too clouded. It was everybody else. It was everything else going on outside of me that was the issue, when he just wanted to work on me and the inside of me.
Mhm. I love that. Man, you know, one of the things that you've mentioned earlier is your journey in codependency. You know, you've talked about that a few times. For the listeners that are out there that are not familiar with the term codependency, which if you've listened to this podcast much, you probably have heard it and heard an explanation a few times. But if you're a first-time listener and you stumbled on this episode, essentially codependency is caring more about what other people think about you and not worrying or caring about what you think about yourself and what God thinks about you, more importantly. You're essentially a people pleaser.
Yes.
Is how the world puts it. You're a people pleaser. You seek the approval of others. And so, Steve, as you talk about codependency becoming a major turning point for you, when you first heard that word applied to you, you know, you mentioned the outward reaction, wanting to deck the counselor that said, hey, you're a codependent, which I can relate to when you first hear about it and you realize that they're talking about you. But internally, what was that reaction? What did that do to you when you first heard that and this idea started to essentially become a reality to you?
Well, obviously, when I first heard it, I was shocked. I was in denial like anybody else. I was an addict. I was an addict. I just did not use a needle or a pill or alcohol or pornography or overeat. I used my emotions. That's the drug I needed. I needed to feel good. I needed to feel needed. I needed to feel loved. So when you start researching that and you start developing on that and start peeling back those layers, you're like, wow, I am an addict. And then the shame comes in even more for a little season. And you're like, how can I let myself get this way? And how can I take this out on my kids and take this out on my wife? I'd preach God because I was needed and felt loved and felt wanted. And then I'd go home and belittle my wife and take my anger out on my kids because I didn't know how to handle it, and yelling at her for passing out on the front row. And she's this, she's that. And it's just a mess. But you start to peel back all those relationships, all those layers, and you start to really recognize and identify with the problem that you have. And for anybody listening, codependency in Steve's definition is if you're putting your value into somebody else and not your own, then you're only as good as that person is that day. So when my wife took pain medicine, I was only as good as she was that day. And what does that mean for Steve? That means that she's taken medicine to escape me. She doesn't like me. There's something wrong with me. She's got to escape from me. So I was the savior part of codependency. Oh, I'll fix her. Because if I fix her, then I'll feel better because she's happy and then I'm happy. So you're putting all your value into somebody else and you're only as good as they are. And what that means is if you wake up in the morning and your spouse, partner, whoever, friend, anybody is upset, you immediately dive to, what did I do? I did something wrong. And then you're a wreck. And then you fight with them because you want to fix it right away. And then you're a wreck for 4 more days because now you two fight and you don't know how to handle it and you just blow up. And that's codependency. And that's the drug. It is a drug. And, you know, going through the counseling and unwrapping it, it's just you slowly have all this vision of what I did, that my dad, my mother, different friends, different people at church. It was all emotional driven.
Absolutely. That's very well said. You know, to the listeners out there, if you're listening to this and something has already struck a chord with you, I mean, we're only about halfway through right now, but we've talked about some pretty big stuff. I invite you to share the episode with the person. I believe that God brings people to mind for a reason. And so even if you don't know why this person came to mind, just take a moment and share the episode with them and just leave it in God's hands, because you don't know the reason. Because we're going to keep going here, but I just wanted to put that out there and invite you to share, because I truly believe it'll help somebody. You know, Steve, codependency became a major turning point for you. And so when you first heard, I mean, you mentioned the desire to deck the person and the internal feelings. And I come back to that because it's just, it's funny to think about, and the fact that you were, I love the fact that you said, hey, I'm an addict, but you use emotions. Because when everybody else thinks addict, they think of things like drugs or alcohol or sometimes pornography or overeating or that type of stuff. They don't think about emotions. That's the furthest thing from anybody's mind when they think about addiction. And so I love that you brought that up. And so when it comes to the codependency, how did that distort your understanding of God's love and your identity in Christ?
It was, he tolerated me. When I had the codependency, you live in that shame and you want to believe that God loves you. But the overpowering of I'm not good enough won't let that happen. It won't let it in. And you transition through talking it out and through scripture and stuff like that. It started to unravel of his goodness, and the codependency part started to kind of just go away. It's not an overnight fix. I was in counseling for 7 years, and it was a slow process of slowly going through the same, going through the same thing as an addict does. You've got to, get through that denial part. Then you got to surrender. And then you got to release all that. You got to forgive. You got to have to go through that same process. And that was hard with codependency because it was an emotional based thing. And you touched on it that, that's the passion, that's the ministry today. And when you bring up the word 12 steps, you immediately go to alcohol and drugs, those people. But what about you with your anger? What about you with your anxiety? What about your depression? What about your codependency? Because there's so many parts of codependency, love addicts and affection and attention getters and all that stuff. Every addiction is tied to I'm not good enough some way. And why aren't we in healing for that? Do we just not think that there's recovery for that? And that's the passion, that's the ministry today. Is I want to help people that are tied to somebody that's with an addict. And I also want to help people that have emotional addictions get free, get out of this. Because God is good and God is really good. And when you can get that less than feeling out of you, there's so much freedom. There's just so much freedom. There's so much weight gone from me. I may still look heavy, but there's a lot of weight off of me emotionally.
One of the things that I talk about quite frequently on this show, and when I'm a guest, we're flipping roles, is I talk about Celebrate Recovery. I love the ministry. I've been a part of it now for many years. I'm a leader myself, and I love that you brought up the ministry of Celebrate Recovery because it's not something that I knew you were going to bring up. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, another Celebrate Recovery person. It was not on purpose. I did not even know that he was in the ministry or part of the ministry. But you've talked a lot about recovery things, and so I'm curious. Tell me about the first time you heard about Celebrate Recovery, and what was the initial thoughts about it, and then what was it like for you walking through the doors of a Celebrate Recovery for the first time?
Yeah, more than happy to share that. And don't know if you also read on the ministry that I created a 12-step program, and we'll talk about that hopefully a little bit later. But Celebrate Recovery was introduced when I became a pastor, and they had it at the church that I was at. And I ended up going to facilitate it, to be the new director of it, and going through all the training and going through all the classes and then participating for, a couple of years in it, along with this codependency that I had. It was touching me, but I couldn't let anybody know because I was a pastor. I was the leader of it. I couldn't be open and honest with these people. How embarrassing would that be? So for me, Celebrate Recovery was slowly working on me. but I couldn't allow people to know that it was working on me, which even drove more shame into me. And it, wonderful program if you're a part of it. And it will help you with not just drugs and alcohol, but I was in the midst of all this mess while I was trying to be a leader in that program, knowing good and well that I needed this just as much as everybody else. I just didn't know I had codependency, but I knew I wanted to believe what we were reading every week. And I wanted to believe those steps, and I wanted to believe and live out those principles. I just didn't think they were for me. So while I was in Celebrate Recovery in my mess, I so needed it, so wanted it. And looking back on it, it really did help me. I just didn't think of it at the time because I had to keep everything a secret.
Yeah. I think that's the case for a lot of pastors when they walk into a recovery thing. They feel like they have to keep their mask on and they can't be seen as human. And that is the furthest thing from the truth when it comes to recovery. When you're at a meeting, whether it be CR or another one, those are safe places, and they're designed for you to be able to take off your mask and be honest, and to not be looked at with disgust or shame or anything like that. You're welcomed, you're accepted, you're loved. And so I love it.
But you have to be honest, like I wasn't.
You do.
So yeah.
That's the key part, is you have to be willing to admit that you're broken.
Yeah.
And you cannot start your journey to recovery and your journey to healing until you're willing to admit that you're broken.
Yeah. And how can I admit I'm broken to people that are broken that look to me to help them get through the brokenness? It was a mess, just a mess.
Yeah. Well, when you're thinking about surrendering, we've the first step to being able to do healing or recovery is surrender. And so when you think about that, what did surrender look like for you? Not in theory, but practically. And what changed when you stopped trying to fix everything?
That turning point when I decided to separate from my family. And I was at a point where I knew that I had to get off the ship or I was going to go down with it. And I was strong enough to move out. And I mean, that's a big step when you're codependent, because you need other people's emotions, and then go to being alone. That was scary. And I moved out. My kids would come see me every weekend, and I started to try to repair this relationship. And you just slowly unmask all those hidden things with codependency, and it starts to become a reality. I don't need her to make me feel good. I don't need my kids to make me feel good. And it ties back into finding your identity in Jesus Christ. When I realized what that really meant through healing, that really started to peel back all that codependency and all that need for everybody else. And so much to the point to where now I don't need anybody, in a sense that I don't wake up to be loved. I wake up to love, because I got all the love that I'll ever need. And that is healing. That is healed. That is where you can get to. That's where we want to get to. But in the midst of that, it's just, there's not any particular step I took. It was just believing truth about who I was. And once you believe the truth about who you are, it's easy to break all those other strongholds.
Right. One of the other things you mentioned earlier, and I kind of laughed when you mentioned it, was that you're a father of 7, and you kind of explained the breakdown and had to break the Brady Bunch mold. That was a nice little thing there. I can't think of the term that I want to use, but as a father of 7, how did your healing journey impact your parenting and the atmosphere in your home?
It was a little chaos. So during the height of all this trouble and hell that I was going through, my oldest son was 18. My second son was 16. And then I had a 4-year-old when the final divorce came through. That's what age they were. So battling with that 18-year-old and trying to repair that relationship. He'll be 30 next month. They have their own issues. They're not addicts, but they do have codependency. And I was going through that with them. And then I meet a beautiful, wonderful woman named Sarah, who's my wife. We've been married 8 years now. And her kids were young and starting to transition from a mess to love. It made my kids jealous. And then we had a child together, my new wife. And my kids would always make comments. Man, if I would have done that, you would have been super mad at me and you would have scolded me and this and that. And it's like, man, I'm so sorry. I was a different person. I was such a different person back then. Because when my child now knocks a plate off because he's not paying attention and falls to the floor and food goes everywhere, I would just come unglued with my older kids because I didn't know how to handle my emotions with the codependency and with the addiction, and I'd take it out on them. And they see this one do the same thing, and I'm like, it's okay. It's just a plate. We'll get you new food. You don't come unglued under circumstances anymore. And trying to blend that with the family, although my kids saw me the ugly way, why can't they see the transformed way? Why does the pain always outweigh the good? I think that's just where the devil wants to keep us if we're not love, light, and shine, because they just see me bouncing off just like a happy-go-lucky guy. My life isn't based off of circumstance anymore. You can't mess me up. You can't wreck me. You can't have me down for 7 days because I'm upset and I need prayer. It's like, no, I come from this place of, I've inherited the kingdom. I have this authority. I can walk this. I can live in this. And I can be the love and I can be the light. I know what it means to take up my cross. It's not about me anymore. It's about everybody else. And once you can come out of that in confidence, it's a good thing because my kids now see love and her kids see love. But unfortunately, my older kids see a man who somewhat seems fake because they can't let go of what I did in the past. And I pray that God will work on them as well, because I can't step into codependency and fix them anymore. I have to love them in their mess, just as Jesus loved me in my mess.
I love that. One of the things, when you think about recovery, and you talked about the fact that you're a different person, but others are having a hard time seeing you as that new person, your kids, and I'm sure their kids are not the only one. That comes back to a very important theme, and this is just recovery in general. And I want to just talk about it real quick. And that is the saying that we say in recovery, that you can clean your side of the street, but you can't clean the others.
Yeah.
You are doing your work. You are improving yourself. You are cleaning your side of the street. And you just have to be okay with the fact that that is enough. You can't make other people see you a certain way, think about you a certain way. You can't clean their side of the street. Only they can clean their side of the street. And that is a tough pill to swallow, especially as a codependent. We want to jump in there and be like, hey, kind of shake them. Look at me. Look at me.
Right.
I'm not that person anymore. Because we want them to see how we really are and to accept it and to love us because of it. But we can't control that.
Exactly.
And so, from your point of view, how does that alter your mindset when you have kids and other people that are just not able to seem to grasp it, at least at this point in time? How do you come to terms with that?
Hardly. Very hard. When you're loved and when you can walk in that confidence, it hurts you, and I can cry for my kids. They're, my 2 older boys, the one is just so angry at me, at the world, and lives his life. And I mean, we have a relationship. He comes over, but I don't put any expectation on the relationship. My the 18-year-old, the middle son, he's living with me now. He just went through 2 love addict relationships, ended up in jail, and he's 27 years old, starting life over. No car, just got a job, rides a bike to work. I mean, complete mess. You just have to, as much as it hurts, you have to let them figure it out, because just like you said, I can't fix people. My job isn't to fix people. And you're healed out of codependency when you can honestly say that. And I don't want to fix them. Gosh, if I can put it this way, the wrath of God, I know what the wrath of God is. It is, as a father, I just want to go into my kids and remove just a fiery, angry, remove every bit of them that they think they're less than, that doesn't go against the identity in Jesus Christ. I want to remove everything out of there that does that. That is the wrath of God. That's what he wants. He just wants just you to not have those feelings. And when you understand that, you can come to a place of, I just have to love them. God never forced anything on me. I could have got out of it a lot quicker by surrendering. I didn't surrender. I locked all those doors, wouldn't let them in. My kids are going to have to do the same thing at some point in their life. They know I have a ministry that I want to help other people like me before they destroy family like I did. And they just don't get it yet. But I can't let it wreck me. Because why? Because I have other kids I got to take care of. I got a wife I got to love. I've got other things I've got to do for the kingdom. And if the devil wants to try to use their less thans to get me a wreck, then he's just going to drag me right back into that codependency, and I can't let that happen.
Yep.
So as we have a blended family, half of them see me as a monster. The other half sees me as this guy's just like Jesus. And it's hard. It's hard. I can cry talking about it. It's the prodigal son story. You just have to sit on the porch waiting for them to come home.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It gives you having been the son and the father, it gives you a new understanding of the prodigal son story.
It does.
You mentioned your ministry. Tell us just a little bit about your 12-step ministry that you're a part of now. And then I would touch on the fact, I want you to answer this question is, why is identity such a foundational piece of recovery?
Yeah, let's start with that one. When you know that you are made in the image of Jesus Christ, if you believe this, and you know that, and you can set that truth inside of you, I think that's what the Bible says, the truth will set you free. This is my belief. This is my process of going through my relationship. So I'm not here to offend anybody. I'm just here to share my story. But, when Adam and Eve fell in the garden, a lot of Christianity in the Western Christianity comes at it as we're sinners, we're wretched, we're ugly. We automatically go into that separation mode. And that's what we teach. You're separated. When you realize you never really were, you just fell under the curse of Adam and Eve, because what happened? Well, they sinned. Really? What did they do? They smoked? Did they drink? See, because we go to behavior modification, you're a sinner. You're doing something bad, you've got to stop. And it's no, you're thinking the wrong thing about yourself, you need to stop. That's what it all is. So when we come into this fallen world of Adam, what'd they do? They felt shame immediately, right off the bat. And we fall into that shame. We didn't fall into behavior modification of doing things. Of course, we do things because of that shame, because of that less than feeling. And then it was the denial. It was shame and denial right off the beginning. I'm naked. I'm embarrassed. I'm shamed. And then, who told you were naked? Well, you gave me that girl over there. She did it. It's her fault. Oh, no, it's not. It was that snake. It was that snake. Denial and shame right off the bat. That's what we have. That's what we're born into, is that denial and shame. Top that on with parents that don't know how to love you because they loved you the best way they could. So when you're drinking from a cup that's empty, you're not going to get anything, and you're going to thirst your whole life like I did. I'm going to thirst. I'm going to be less than. I'm going to, until this cup I drank of truth and understand that Jesus, it's not a Christmas and Easter story. Jesus died upon the cross. He shed his blood so that I can be reconciled back to my original self before the fall of Adam and Eve. I don't know why we think Adam has more power than the second Adam. The second Adam has way more power, and that blood was shed for us. And we come under that place of authority of, wow, he really did die for me. He really wanted to make me better. He really wanted me back to my original image before the fall of the world. It's amazing. It's an amazing story. It's such a freeing story. We make it about getting out of here. We want to get out of here so quick. We got to go to heaven. We got to get out of here. When all he said was, the kingdom's here. Will you help me bring it here and blend it here and live out this life here? So when you're talking about identity, that's where we come under. That's where we live from. And you have to understand that, because like I said, there's so many people in church that are never transformed. They just hide behind going to church, or they use God to get them through what they need to get through. And it's not that. Taking off the old self, which is your Adam thought process, and putting on this new one, which is taking up the love and light of Jesus Christ and being that to the world. Other self-serving sacrificial love, right? That's what it is. That's all it is. So jumping into the ministry, Celebrate Recovery is great. I was part of it. I'm part of it at my church now, leading other people and just sharing a story and just sharing this truth now with people. But I still think that some of these things keep you into the behavior modification. If you could stop the behavior, and surrender that to God, surrender the behavior and do all this, stop, and we can make it better to where my 12 step is based off the identity of Jesus Christ. I want to dive into what's inside, because once we can fix that thought process, that repentance, that changing of the mind, we're missing the mark of who we were created to be. And we have to change our mind about that and who we are. You'll want to stop the addiction. We have to go through transformation. So it's a program of community to where people can come on and just, how can I say this? Paul said we go through these sufferings. Why do we go through these sufferings? So we can walk alongside other people and help them through their sufferings. And then we're going to go through I'll go through some suffering here whenever, and then somebody's going to be there to help me through that. And it's just a community of people and love and light and just helping others. So it's a program designed not to replace any 12-step program at all. It's just a community that's online. So I know when I was going through Celebrate Recovery, some people couldn't wait Thursday to 6:00 to get to a meeting. They needed somebody now. And there were single females in there that had 3 kids and 2 jobs, and they couldn't get to a step meeting. The only time they could work on themselves was at 11:00 at night when they got everybody to bed. So I created this community for people to come on and love each other and help each other. And there's 12 steps, and there's principles, and there's worksheets, and there's everything like Celebrate Recovery, but it's just online. And I designed it like this. I've invited you all to this wonderful party, and you're all having such a great time that I can go upstairs and go to bed. I'm not needed. I just facilitate it. It's not a program that's all about me. It's not a program that's all about, oh, look at me. I'm done with that codependency stuff. The passion is you help each other. That's what community is. That's what kingdom living is.
I love it. Community is so important, and I love that. I'm a firm believer that you can never have too many places for community to be able to gather, especially if it's going to be a healthy community that can be there to support you when you need it. So kudos to you for doing that.
And it's not for those people. It's for everybody.
Many people in church circles feel pressure to appear strong, especially leaders. We've talked about that in this episode. What would you say right now to the pastor, to the volunteer, to the ministry leader who's out there and they're serving, but they're secretly drowning?
There's help, and there's victory on the other side of that. You don't have to live in that shame. You don't have to live in that secret. That's such a big weight. And man, that's the passion. It's just to help people remove that weight. There's just, we look at I'm going to be embarrassed. I'm going to be fallen. I'm going to be this and that. I can tell you this. I think your church will honor you a lot more from being open and honest. And I think the Holy Spirit will come in and just move incredibly to watch people have you and walk through that with you.
Yeah, I would agree. I can say from my personal experience that I look at pastors differently when they are, in a good way, when they are honest from the pulpit and they say, I've had this crap in my life. I've dealt with addictions to pornography. I've dealt with alcoholism. I've dealt with drugs. I've done all these things in my past, because it gives you, as a member of the congregation or a first-time visitor, a new way to be able to relate with them, and the ability to be like, they know where I've been or what I'm going through right now. And so it just opens the door for people to be honest with you in ways that they probably wouldn't be otherwise, because they know that you've been there.
Yeah.
And so it's just so important that you do that.
Well, if I can add, that's kind of another reason why I made the community, is because you can slowly go online, do step work without anybody knowing in your area.
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully that will get you to enough point of encouragement to go out and get into a step program in your local community, because we can't do everything online. I know that. We have to have community in full person. So it might be something for you to check out as well.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I have one more question for you, but before I ask it, I want to give you the opportunity here. Somebody's out there, they're listening, and they want to find out more about you or check out this community that you built. Where can they find you in the community online?
Yeah. WalkRightMinistries.com will get you everywhere. WalkRightMinistries.com sounds like it, or it's, spell it out like it sounds. You'll find about the speaking engagements. I do coaching one-on-one. I've got a podcast called Recovery and Identity that I just started that walks through steps and just talks about recovery, but you can find the community from there. I've got 2 guides. I've got a guide called Do I Really Need Step Work in Community, which is a little 30-page guide and evaluation on if you need step work or maybe a loved one might need step work. Because again, it's not for drug addicts and alcoholics. It's for anybody. And then I've got another one called Rise Above, a guide to untangling relationships affected by addiction. So if you're entangled with somebody that's an addict and just don't know where to go, this is a nice little self-evaluation too that can help you also get into step work. Because if you're entangled with somebody that's an addict, it's a dead-end road. I'm just going to tell you right now, it's a dead-end road. And you have to save yourself and your family or whoever, or you're just going to go down with the ship.
Mm-hmm.
So walkrightministries.com, that's where you can find everything.
Perfect. And I will leave a link to that down in the show notes. So if you're listening today and you're driving down the road or somewhere that you can't write it down, have no fear. I'll have a link for it in the comment or in the show notes. Well, Steve, one of the things that I love to do on this show to end the show is to leave my listeners with an action step. Something that they can do right now, something that they can think about in order to continue or start their walk, maybe with the Lord, or walk in their recovery and to begin living unmasked. And so if there's somebody out there right now that's listening and they feel trapped in shame, whether it be from addiction, codependency, trauma, failure, you name it, what is the first step towards freedom that they can start taking right now?
I would ask them to get into a very quiet area and just come to God and just say, God, I know that I have an issue. I'm at a breaking point right now. and I feel all this weight and pressure. Are you truly inside of me and want to fix this? And keep doing that until you get an answer, because he will answer you. And it's not going to be an audible answer outside your head. I mean, it could be. Heck, you'd be a lucky one, but it's going to be your own voice, but you're going to hear the Spirit move, and it's going to move you into a direction. And if it has anything to do with fear, that's not that voice. But get alone, get quiet, and just ask him, are you inside of me? Are you there? And he'll answer you. I did that through therapy. And once I started doing that, I really started to hear him, because all I heard was myself. Those times of pastoring, I just heard myself. It was just, I've got to fix this. I got to fix that. I got to do this. I got to keep people at bay here. I got to keep this lie going. I got to, you know what I mean? It's just that codependency world. But he will talk to you once you get a clear head, and he will have a conversation with you daily if you want it. You just got to want it. But start there. There's victory. There is so much victory and so much freedom. I can't express that enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's so good. He is so good beyond our belief.
He absolutely is. And there's one thing there that you said that I want to touch on real quick and just clarify from my perspective is, he's going to talk to you if you ask and you listen, but he may ask you to do something that is going to be very uncomfortable. And because of that, you're going to fear it. He may say, hey, yeah, you're not walking with me. I need you to stop doing X, Y, or Z. And you're going to be scared out of your mind to do it because you're used to it. You're comfortable with it. It's a part of you now.
Yes.
And so I just want you to know that he will answer, and it may be a little scary, but he's not going to ask you to walk in that fear. And he will help you if you're willing to take that step.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Because what I meant by fear, or lies, is anything that going to point you to be even more less than or more shameful, or I don't like you, you're not good enough, you're going to have to clean yourself up before you come to me. Don't listen to that stuff. But what you're talking about, you may say, hey, you need to tell 10 people today that you got a problem. That's going to be fearful. That's the good way. You got to go.
Well, Steve, thank you so much again for coming on Unmasked and sharing your story with us and trusting us with your story. It truly means the world, and I've really enjoyed the conversation.
It was an honor to be here, and I give all the glory to him, and just thank you so much for facilitating this to be able to reach people in the kingdom. So that's awesome.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining me today on Unmasked. And again, a huge thanks to Steve for being on the show and sharing so openly and honestly. If something in this episode spoke to you, don't let it stop with you. Share it with the one person that God put on your heart while you were listening, because you never know whose breakthrough might start with just a simple message from you. If you want more encouragement, you want to speak with me or work with me one-on-one, or you're interested in having me speak at your church or event, you can find everything at wesleyfarnsworth.com. And make sure you join the Unmasked community by connecting with me on social media so that we can keep walking this journey together. Until next time, remember that grace is greater than your past, and freedom begins the moment that you choose to live unmasked.